We're back on the SportsMax Zone. The fourth and final test of the Border Gavaskar series between hosts Australia and India will start Thursday evening Caribbean time at the Gabba in Brisbane with the series level at 1-1. You can catch the action live on SportsMax starting at 6:30, 7:30 Eastern Caribbean time. Now, it has been 26 years since a team came from behind to win a test series in Australia. No prizes for guessing. That team was, of course, the West Indies, which came from 1-0 down to beat Australia 2-1 in a 5-match series back in 1993. That was a famous fourth test when Courtney Walsh had Craig McDermott out, caught behind and winning the match by 1 run to tie the series. And then in the fifth test match, Curtly Ambrose with his 7-for-1 spell and 7 for 25 off 18 overs meant that he had propelled the West Indies to a famous series win. So India will have a tough task ahead of them even before you consider Australia's formidable record at the Gabba. They have won, the Aussies, 33, drawn 13, tied 1 and lost 8 out of the 55 matches at the ground. Now, injuries have affected India in this series, and they are set to make at least 3 changes for this deciding test match. Jasprit Bumrah, Ravi Jadeja, and Hanuma Vihari are ruled out, and there are doubts over the fitness of Mayank Agarwal and Ravi Ashwin. Now, for the Aussies, only Will Pucovski is a slight doubt, with the team awaiting the results of a scan on a right shoulder concern. The former Australia captain Ricky Ponting reckons India's injury concerns give the hosts the advantage. Here's what Ricky Ponting says. Australia will have the edge going to Brisbane. 1, Australia's Gabba's record, and 2, if Will's okay, then they won't have to make any changes. And if Will's not, they'll only have to make 1 change. And they have had a pretty dominant performance in this game. He's talking about the previous test. India, again, are going to have a couple of injury concerns out of this game. So they've got to find another couple of guys to bring in. So that's the story for this series. As we've said, it's been a gripping series from day one as the Aussies battle the Indians. Aussies starting the series as world number 1. They have been surpassed on the ICC World Team Rankings list now by the New Zealanders, and so now the Aussies are number 2 and India are number 3. And now Fazeer Mohammed still joining us on the line here to continue this discussion. Faz, Ricky Ponting said it, and I guess looking on at the series, India having a mountainous climb here because of their injury concerns. And, you know, even with the fight that they showed in the previous test match, they're really up against it here against an Aussie team whose record at the Gabba is pretty solid.
Yes, and just to continue that analogy we were drawing about the decline of West Indies cricket, you mentioned the last time a team would have come from behind would have been West Indies, 1992-93. The last time Australia lost a test match at the Gabba was 1988, and again, the opponents were the West Indies. But just to put it in context, I think Ponting gives a fair assessment of the realities of all of the injuries suffered by India. But I think India, under Ajinkya Rahane, are a really steely, determined sort of team. Because if you really put it in context, Lance, when you look at the comparison of the 2 series, 2 years ago, when Australia were without Warner or without Smith, India were basically at full strength and had everything more or less going their way. To now have a situation with all the injuries that they suffered, to be without so many of their key fast bowlers and losing them one after the other as the test series went along, losing other players along the way. To come into a final test match at the Gabba or anywhere else for that matter at 1-1 against an Australian team that, yes, would have had their issues as well and dropped a few catches and so on. In context, if you were to try to weigh the different issues, you'd almost want to say that India have performed better in 2020, 2021 than they did 2 years ago.
Yeah, you know, a lot has been said about Virat Kohli, the regular Indian captain, Faz. We know how intense and aggressive a captain he is. Rahane is a different personality. Could it be that maybe under Kohli's leadership, some of the players feel, you know, a little cramped and intimidated even, and Rahane gives them a little bit more freedom to express themselves? I'm not sure if that's a possibility.
I think it could be because there's so many different personalities when you talk about it, and you draw that reference to Virat Kohli. I remember the tenure of Sir Vivian Richards, who never lost a test series as a West Indies captain, but he was that type of individual, and it's no surprise that Sir Vivian Richards is an idol when it comes to Virat Kohli, because you see that aggression, you see that almost going over the top at times as well, which can be intimidating to your own teammates. And again, we're speculating from 14,000 miles away. But when you looked at the way Rahane took on the challenge of being the captain from the second test match onwards, and the way he's been handling things, he hasn't blown his top, he hasn't lost his cool, he's generally seems to be very measured about so much that is going on, and potentially inflammatory situations, that it's fair to speculate that his style of captaincy is actually helping to bring the best out of some of his emerging players.
Fazeer, let's talk about Timothy David Payne, the Australia captain, the wicket-keeper. He had a nightmare, it's fair to say, in that third test at the SCG, dropping 3 vital catches. Perhaps had they gone, had they stuck, we'd be talking about an Australia going into the fourth test in a can't lose the series position. But Tim Payne's failures in the third test and the manner of his performance, how does he begin to galvanize himself before he does the very important job of galvanizing a team to go into that fourth test and win the game? I know Fazeer doesn't take so long to process questions. Is he there?
You were breaking up just a bit, George. I didn't hear you for about 15 seconds.
Oh, well, that's a long time. I was asking about Tim Payne and the nightmare he had at Sydney and the fact of the 3 catches he dropped at the crucial point for the Aussies. And I'm asking you, how does he, in the context of the series, galvanize himself and then his team to go on and win this game?
Well, I think it's the Aussie way, that they play the game hard, they claim that they played fair, which I don't agree with, but that's another story for another time. But also, they develop their own narratives, and that's why when you hear about the Aussies drawing the line on this issue, the Aussies not going over the line on this issue, it's because they walk around with their own marker, their own eraser, and their own whiteboard, because they draw their own line. So they will always, it's a self-fulfilling sort of prophecy when it comes to Australia and Australian sport, because they believe, they are so utterly convinced of the correctness of their position, even if so many others will be seeing it differently, that they almost convince themselves that they are on the right, that they have some divine right to prevail. And usually when you have that very positive attitude, it actually overwhelms the opposition. It'll be interesting to see how it happens this round. Will he be needling the batsman again from behind the stumps and making all sorts of different comments which are allowed to go by because it's considered to be all part of the mental disintegration? That Steve Vaughan nonsensical phrase. But again, it's about drawing their own line and then pointing fingers when anybody else on the other side is perceived to be crossing the line that they have created.
But Fazeer, insofar as Tim Payne is concerned, the players that we have seen over time for Australia who've been in dark places where their form is concerned are coming off a horrendous performance in a test match that was inimical to their side's push for victory. Those have been world-class players who have bounced back. I doubt you'll find anybody telling you that Tim Payne is a world-class Australian cricketer, although his numbers are decent. So isn't it going to be a particular challenge for him to come back and bounce back with the kind of performance you've expected from an Aussie under pressure that you've seen so many times in the past?
Well, I think that when he would have come into the captaincy after that fiasco of the Cape Town Test match almost 3 years ago now, you couldn't find a more difficult situation to come in as a captain of any team, especially in South Africa, given the fact that the bad blood over many decades between Australia and South Africa in sport and especially in cricket. And yes, he may not ever be ranked among the greats of Australian cricket, but he's had to steer his team through some very difficult waters at a time when they were branded basically as cheats who wrote their own rules on the game. So I would doubt very much that this particular situation would be throwing him off too much unless he spends all his day reading everything that is said about him, going on YouTube to hear and watch everything that is said about him. But I would suspect that he would be going into it with a clear mind and believing, as per usual in the Australian way, that they are always right, they are always on the right track. And I don't see him intimidated at all. Whatever the numbers are, whatever his own personal numbers are, I think he will look upon it as positively as he would even before that third test match.
Yeah, well, India's walking wounded. The army is growing bigger by the day. And perhaps, Fazeer, if you could get some hair dye and get on the plane to Australia, you could get a game bowling some spin for them. Who knows? We'll take a break.
Even that I don't think would happen. I don't think that could possibly happen. Even if everyone were on crutches, that they would entertain me that team.
We'll take a break. We come back with more. Stay where you are, Fazeer. Don't go.